The shuttle's hull trembled as it pierced Zareth's atmosphere, its engines whining in protest. Commander Lucas Vayne gripped the edge of his seat, feeling the vibrations hum through his fingertips. The acrid scent of burnt ozone seeped into the cabin as the ship's sensors struggled to recalibrate to the hostile environment below. Outside the window, swirling clouds of violet spores blotted out the sun, casting the planet in an eerie, perpetual twilight. "Commander, we're getting another transmission from the Council," said Lieutenant Darrow, his voice taut with nerves. He adjusted his headset, the glow from his console illuminating his pale face. "Let me guess," Lucas said, his tone dry. "Another polite reminder that I'm disobeying direct orders?" "More like a threat this time." Darrow hesitated before playing the message. The sharp voice of Counselor Thalix crackled over the speakers, cold and biting. "Commander Vayne, your unauthorized descent onto Zareth violates quarantine protocols. Return to orbit immediately or face court-martial. The planet is lost, and your actions risk spreading the Void Spore to uncontaminated systems. This is your final warning." Lucas leaned forward, his jaw tightening as he stared at the spore-laden horizon ahead. The sprawling ruins of Zareth's capital city emerged like jagged teeth from the haze. Once a gleaming metropolis of crystalline towers and vibrant alien life, it now lay silent and decayed, its beauty smothered by the spore's relentless advance. "They've written this place off," Lucas muttered, almost to himself. His voice carried a quiet defiance. "But there are people down there, survivors. If we don't act now, they'll die, just like the billions before them." "Sir," Darrow said cautiously, his eyes darting to the warning lights flickering across his console. "Our systems weren't designed for this level of contamination. The spores are already interfering with life support." "Then we better make this quick." Lucas's tone left no room for argument. The shuttle landed with a jarring thud, its landing gear sinking into the ashen remains of what had once been a bustling marketplace. Lucas stood, his boots clanging against the grated floor as he grabbed his helmet. The HUD inside flickered to life, displaying a cacophony of warning alerts: toxic levels, critical; biohazard risk, extreme. "Stay with the shuttle," Lucas ordered Darrow, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, leave without me." "Commander, That's an order, Lieutenant." Lucas didn't wait for a reply as he descended the ramp. The air outside was thick and suffocating, a caustic mix of decay and chemical tang that even his helmet's filters struggled to block. The ground crunched beneath his boots, a brittle layer of ash and crystalline spore fragments that shimmered like broken glass. The ruins loomed around him, skeletal remnants of Zareth's grandeur. As Lucas moved cautiously through the desolate streets, the oppressive silence pressed down on him. The only sounds were the faint hiss of his respirator and the distant crackle of spore clusters splitting open, releasing tendrils of violet mist into the air. He stopped suddenly, his heart quickening. A faint noise, almost imperceptible, reached his ears. A soft, ragged sob carried by the toxic wind. "Hello?" Lucas called out, his voice muffled by the helmet. He activated his scanner, the device emitting a soft pulse that swept the area. The display flashed red as it detected movement nearby. He followed the sound, weaving through crumbled archways and collapsed structures until he found the source. Huddled in the shadow of a fallen tower was a Zarethian child, her silver skin dulled and marred by patches of spore infection. Her wide, luminescent eyes locked onto Lucas, a mix of fear and desperation in her gaze. "It's okay," Lucas said softly, kneeling to her level. He removed a vial of immunoboosters from his belt, the liquid inside glowing faintly. "I'm here to help." The child flinched as he approached, her small frame trembling. Lucas hesitated, his own doubt creeping in. Would she even trust him? He knew little of Zarethian customs, let alone how to comfort a frightened alien child. The moment stretched, the distant hum of spore activity growing louder. Lucas's pulse quickened. "We don't have much time," he said gently, holding out the vial. "This will help you fight the infection." The child's eyes flicked to the vial, then back to Lucas. Slowly she reached out, her fingers brushing against the glass. Before Lucas could administer the injection, a sharp metallic screech cut through the air. He spun around, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. Emerging from the haze were spore tendrils, coiling and slithering like sentient snakes. They glistened with an oily sheen, their movements unnervingly deliberate. "Stay behind me," Lucas said, his voice low but firm. The tendrils surged forward, their tips splitting open to reveal barbed appendages. Lucas fired, the sharp retorts of his weapon echoing through the ruins. The energy rounds struck the tendrils, causing them to writhe and screech, but more emerged from the mist, relentless in their advance. Lucas backed away, shielding the child with his body. The tendrils closed in, their movements faster, more coordinated. Lucas's mind raced. He couldn't hold them off forever, not with limited ammo and no backup. "Commander Vayne to shuttle," he barked into his comms. "We've got hostile spore activity. Deploy extraction protocols now." Static hissed in response, the interference from the spores blocking communication. Lucas cursed under his breath. The tendrils lunged, their barbs slashing through the air. Lucas dodged, narrowly avoiding a strike that left a jagged gash in the wall beside him. He fired again, the rounds cutting through one tendril, but two more took its place. "Move, move!" Lucas yelled, grabbing the child and sprinting toward the nearest cover, a half-collapsed building that offered temporary shelter. Inside, the air was dense and stifling, the spore clusters glowing faintly in the dim light. Lucas set the child down, his chest heaving as he checked his weapon's charge. 5 shots left. Not enough. The tendrils scraped against the building's exterior, their screeches vibrating through the walls. Lucas's mind raced for a solution. He glanced at the child, who clutched the vial he'd given her, her eyes wide with terror. Then it hit him. "Your people," he said, his voice urgent. "Do you have a safe zone, somewhere the spores can't reach?" The child hesitated, then nodded slowly, pointing toward the horizon. "Good. We're getting you there." The tendrils crashed through the weakened wall, their barbs glinting menacingly. Lucas didn't wait. He grabbed the child and bolted, the spores' screeches echoing behind them as they disappeared into the ruins. Above, the violet haze thickened, and the faint glow of the sun vanished entirely. The chase was on. Lucas's legs burned with each step as he sprinted through the crumbling ruins of Zareth, clutching the child tightly to his chest. The hiss of pursuing spore tendrils and the eerie screeches they emitted reverberated through the hollowed-out streets. His boots crunched against shards of shattered crystal and debris, the jagged remnants of what had once been a thriving marketplace. He darted into an alley, his breath fogging up the inside of his helmet. The child in his arms squirmed, her silvery skin trembling against his uniform. "Shh, I've got you," Lucas whispered, trying to keep his voice calm despite the pounding in his chest. "We'll get through this." A sharp screech cut through the air, followed by the thud of something heavy slamming into the ground. The tendrils were close, too close. Lucas ducked into a partially collapsed building, setting the child down carefully behind a shattered pillar. The interior was dim, with faint beams of sunlight cutting through gaps in the ceiling. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, a surreal contrast to the chaos outside. "Stay here," Lucas said firmly, meeting the child's wide, terrified eyes. She nodded hesitantly, clutching the vial of immunoboosters he'd given her like it was a lifeline. Lucas peered around the edge of the doorway, his hand gripping his sidearm tightly. The tendrils slithered into view, their oily surfaces glistening in the faint light. They moved with unnerving precision, coiling and striking like predators sniffing out prey. Lucas's pulse quickened. "Come on, you ugly bastards," he muttered, raising his weapon. He fired, the energy bolt slamming into the lead tendril. It recoiled with a piercing screech, its barbed tip spasming before collapsing in a heap. But 2 more surged forward, relentless. Lucas fired again, each shot precise but barely slowing their advance. A tendril lashed out, striking the wall beside him and sending shards of crystal flying. Lucas ducked, the debris pinging off his helmet as he scrambled back toward the child. "This isn't working," he muttered, his voice laced with frustration. His sidearm's display flashed red. 3 shots left. The tendrils advanced, their screeches rising in pitch as they closed in. Lucas's mind raced, searching for anything he could use. His gaze landed on a broken support beam leaning precariously against the building's ceiling. "Hold on," he told the child before aiming at the beam. The shot echoed through the room, and the beam groaned before collapsing, bringing a section of the ceiling down with it. Dust and debris rained down, obscuring the tendrils in a choking cloud. Lucas grabbed the child and bolted through a side exit, the sound of their pursuit fading behind him. They emerged into an open plaza, the faint remnants of a fountain at its center. The air was thick with the acrid stench of decay, and the oppressive violet haze made it feel like the world was closing in around them. Lucas set the child down again, leaning against a pillar to catch his breath. "We're running out of time," he muttered to himself, glancing at the child. Her breathing was shallow, her silver skin dulling further, a sign that the spores were taking hold. Lucas activated his wrist scanner, the device emitting a soft pulse that swept the area. The display flickered, struggling to function in the contaminated environment, but it managed to pick up faint biosignatures nearby. "There," Lucas said, pointing toward the faint signal. "There's someone else alive. We're not alone." The child looked at him, her wide eyes filling with a glimmer of hope. Lucas lifted her into his arms again and began moving toward the signal. The ruins seemed to stretch endlessly, each turn revealing more devastation. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant crackle of spore clusters rupturing in the distance. As they approached the source of the biosignature, Lucas's scanner beeped with increasing urgency. They rounded a corner and found themselves at the entrance of what appeared to be an underground bunker. The heavy metal door was partially ajar, its surface scarred and corroded by the spores. Lucas set the child down and drew his weapon. He pushed the door open cautiously, its hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dimly lit by flickering overhead lights, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. The air smelled stale, tinged with a faint metallic tang. "Hello?" Lucas called out, his voice echoing in the space. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall Zarethian male, his silver skin mottled with dark patches of infection. He held a makeshift weapon, crafted from scavenged parts, and his glowing eyes narrowed as they landed on Lucas. "You're human," the figure said, his tone both wary and accusatory. "And you're alive," Lucas replied, lowering his weapon slightly. "I'm here to help." The Zarethian scoffed, his gaze flicking to the child behind Lucas. "Your kind shouldn't even be here. The spores, they'll consume you like they've consumed everything else." "Maybe," Lucas said, stepping closer. "But so far, my biology is holding up better than expected. I think there's something about humans, our immune systems, that the spores can't adapt to as quickly." The Zarethian's expression shifted, skepticism giving way to a flicker of interest. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we work together," Lucas said. "I need your help to figure out why the spores haven't killed me yet. If we can understand that, we might be able to find a way to fight back." The Zarethian hesitated, his grip on the makeshift weapon tightening. The tension in the room was palpable, the faint hum of the spores outside serving as a constant reminder of the danger. "Fine," he said finally, lowering his weapon. "I'm Dr. Toval. If you're serious about this, follow me." Lucas motioned for the child to stay close as they followed Toval deeper into the bunker. The space was cramped, filled with hastily assembled equipment and makeshift medical supplies. The faint hum of machinery underscored the desperate ingenuity of the setup. Toval gestured toward a table covered in scattered instruments. "If your biology is as unique as you say, we need a sample. Sit." Lucas complied, removing his helmet and rolling up his sleeve. The air inside the bunker was marginally better than outside, but the smell of antiseptic and stale sweat lingered. Toval worked quickly, his movements precise as he drew a sample of Lucas's blood. As the Zarethian analyzed the sample, Lucas turned to the child, handing her a protein bar from his pack. "Eat," he said gently. "You need your strength." She nodded, taking small tentative bites as her glowing eyes flicked between Lucas and Toval. After what felt like an eternity, Toval straightened, his expression unreadable. "Well?" Lucas asked, his voice laced with impatience. There's something different about your immune response, Toval said slowly. It's adapting to the spores in ways I've never seen before. It's almost as if... He trailed off, his gaze sharpening. As if what? As if your body thrives on chaos, Toval said, his voice tinged with awe. The spores are mutating too quickly for most species to keep up, but your immune system isn't trying to fight them conventionally. It's adapting alongside them. Lucas leaned back, his mind racing. This was it, the breakthrough he needed. Can we use it? He asked. Can we turn my biology into a weapon against the spores? Toval hesitated, his expression darkening. Perhaps, but the process would be dangerous, and the spores won't give us much time. Lucas's jaw tightened. Then we'd better get to work. Outside, the faint screeches of the Void Spore grew louder, as if sensing the challenge to its dominance. The battle for Zareth and the Galaxy had truly begun. Dr. Toval's hands moved swiftly across the cluttered console, his silver-skinned fingers dancing over the makeshift lab equipment. The faint glow of a screen cast sharp shadows across his angular face as he reviewed Lucas's blood sample. Lucas stood nearby, the child curled up beside him on a tattered blanket. The hum of the bunker's failing air filtration system underscored the tension in the room. This shouldn't be possible, Toval muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Your immune system is reacting to the Void Spore like it's just another pathogen. It's adapting, forming new antibodies faster than anything I've seen in Zarethian biology, or any galactic species. Lucas leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Earth's history isn't exactly sterile, he said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. We've been fighting pathogens since before we could write. Plague after plague, mutation after mutation. We've always been forced to adapt or die. Toval glanced up from his work, skepticism mingling with curiosity. That doesn't explain the speed of this reaction. Zarethians have survived their share of biological threats, but nothing in our immune systems has managed to counter the Void Spore. What makes humans different? Diversity, Lucas replied. Our immune systems aren't built for perfection. They're chaotic, a patchwork of genetic material inherited from generations of exposure to diseases, parasites, and environmental stressors. Most species in the Galactic Union evolved in stable environments. Humans? We were shaped by instability. Toval frowned. Instability? Elaborate. Lucas pushed off the wall, his boots echoing faintly on the metal floor. Take our immune response. Humans have billions of white blood cells, macrophages, T cells, and B cells, constantly scanning for invaders. When a pathogen hits, our body launches a counterattack, creating memory cells for the next encounter. That's basic immunity. He gestured toward the screen displaying his blood sample. But what's unique is our ability to thrive on variety. The sheer genetic diversity in our immune systems means no single pathogen can wipe out the entire population. Mutation is our weapon. Toval tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. But the Void Spore doesn't behave like ordinary pathogens. It mutates constantly, creating endless variations of itself. Exactly, Lucas said. Most species in the Galactic Union rely on precision, sterile environments, genetic uniformity, and streamlined immune systems that work like a scalpel. Humanity's immune system is more like a hammer, messy, imprecise, but damn good at smashing whatever comes our way. Toval's expression darkened. And yet, your hammer might not be enough. If we attempt to synthesize a countermeasure based on your biology, it could destabilize your immune system entirely. You could destroy yourself. Not the first time I've put my life on the line for something bigger, Lucas said, his voice steady. If this works, we can save Zareth, maybe the whole galaxy. What's one human life compared to that? Before Toval could respond, a loud thud echoed from the bunker's entrance. Both men froze. The child whimpered, clutching the blanket tightly. Lucas drew his sidearm, his muscles coiled with tension. Stay here, he whispered to the child, nodding toward Toval. Lock the door behind me. Lucas moved cautiously toward the entrance, his boots crunching softly on the gritty floor. He pressed his back against the wall beside the partially open door, the faint glow of the spores outside casting shifting shadows into the room. With a deep breath, he stepped into the doorway, weapon raised. Two Zerethian soldiers stood outside, their crystalline armor glinting faintly in the spore-laden light. They held weapons at the ready, their glowing eyes fixed on Lucas. "You shouldn't be here, human," one of them said, his voice low and accusatory. "The Galactic Union ordered a complete quarantine." Lucas kept his weapon lowered but his grip firm. "I'm here because the Union wrote Zareth off as a lost cause. There are still lives to save." The second soldier sneered. "You think your fragile species can save us? The spores will consume you like they've consumed everything else." "Not if I can help it," Lucas shot back. "I have a plan, something your leaders didn't bother to consider. But if you'd rather let your people die while you cling to bureaucracy, be my guest." The first soldier hesitated, exchanging a glance with his companion. "You have 2 hours," he said finally. "After that, we're reporting this operation to the Union." Lucas nodded. "That's all the time I need." Back inside the bunker, Toval was already working furiously. "The spore sample is reacting to your blood," he said, his voice a mix of awe and urgency. "The antibodies you're producing are binding to its surface proteins, disrupting its ability to mutate." Lucas leaned over the screen, watching as the microscopic battle unfolded. Human antibodies latched onto the spore's cells, effectively flagging them for destruction. The spores writhed and contorted, their structures collapsing under the relentless assault. "Can we scale this up?" Lucas asked. Toval hesitated. "Perhaps. But it would require extracting a significant amount of your blood to synthesize enough serum for even a small area. And the process would weaken you, possibly fatally." "I'll survive," Lucas said firmly. "Just tell me what you need." For the next hour, the bunker became a flurry of activity. Toval worked with ruthless efficiency, extracting and refining Lucas's blood to isolate the active antibodies. The child watched quietly from her corner, her glowing eyes following Lucas's every move. As Toval prepared the first batch of synthesized serum, Lucas felt the fatigue setting in. His vision blurred slightly, and his limbs felt heavier with each passing minute. Still, he forced himself to focus, his resolve unshaken. Toval handed him a vial of the glowing serum. "This is the prototype," he said. "It's untested. If you inject it directly into the spore cluster, it could neutralize the infection in the immediate area. Or it could accelerate the mutation and make it worse." Lucas nodded, taking the vial. "No risk, no reward." He strapped on his helmet, the HUD flickering back to life. As he moved toward the door, the child tugged at his sleeve. Lucas knelt, meeting her gaze. "Stay here," he said softly. "I'll be back." The child's fingers tightened around the blanket. "Promise?" Lucas hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Promise." He stepped out into the ruined streets, the vial of serum secure in his pack. The air was colder now, the violet haze thickening as the spores grew more aggressive. Tendrils writhed in the distance, their movements unnervingly coordinated. Lucas approached the nearest spore cluster, its surface pulsating with an otherworldly rhythm. The smell of decay and ozone hung heavy in the air, and the faint crackle of spore activity sent a shiver down his spine. "This is it," he muttered, pulling out the vial. He injected it into the heart of the cluster, stepping back as the serum spread through the spore's veins like liquid fire. At first, nothing happened. Then the cluster shuddered violently, its tendrils convulsing as the serum took hold. The spore's surface began to collapse, its once vivid glow dimming as it crumbled into ash. Lucas allowed himself a small smile. "It's working." But his relief was short-lived. In the distance, more tendrils emerged, their screeches rising in pitch. The Void Spore was adapting again, and it wasn't happy. Lucas keyed his comms. "Toval, the serum works, but the spores are retaliating. We need to move fast." "Understood," Toval replied. "Prepare for extraction." As Lucas turned to head back to the bunker, the ground beneath him trembled. The spores weren't just mutating. They were evolving into something far more dangerous. The fight for survival had only just begun. Lucas sprinted back toward the bunker, the sound of the Void Spore's tendrils screeching behind him. Each step felt heavier than the last, his fatigue compounding as his body struggled to keep up with the demands of the serum synthesis. The destruction of the spore cluster had momentarily slowed their advance, but the spores were already evolving, growing more aggressive and coordinated. He burst through the bunker's entrance, his chest heaving as the airlock hissed shut behind him. Dr. Toval turned, his face a mix of relief and alarm as he noted Lucas's condition. "You look worse than when you left," Toval remarked, setting aside the console he'd been working on. "I'm fine," Lucas replied, though his voice betrayed his exhaustion. He pointed toward the child, who was still curled up in her corner, shivering under the blanket. Her silver skin had dulled further, and faint cracks appeared around her infection sites. "How is she?" "Not good," Toval admitted grimly. "The immunoboosters you gave her aren't enough. The spores are spreading faster than her body can fight them off." Lucas frowned, his jaw tightening. "We need to try the serum." Toval shook his head. "We've barely tested it. Injecting her with an unrefined prototype could destabilize her system entirely." "And doing nothing will kill her," Lucas snapped, his frustration bubbling over. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "I saw the serum work on the cluster. We have to take the risk." Toval hesitated, glancing at the child, whose faint whimpers filled the tense silence. Finally he sighed. "I'll prepare the injection." As Toval readied the dose, Lucas knelt beside the child. Her glowing eyes flickered open, duller than before, and she looked up at him with a mixture of fear and trust. Lucas felt a pang in his chest. "Hey," he said softly, brushing a strand of her hair away from her face. "We're going to try something new. It might sting a little, but it's going to help you feel better. I promise." She gave the faintest of nods, her small fingers clutching at his sleeve. Toval approached with the syringe, the serum inside glowing faintly. He handed it to Lucas, his expression grim. "If this doesn't work—" "It will," Lucas said firmly, though he couldn't ignore the knot of doubt twisting in his gut. He injected the serum into the child's arm, watching as the liquid disappeared beneath her silver skin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her body convulsed, her back arching as she let out a strangled cry. "Toval!" Lucas shouted, panic surging through him. "She's reacting to the serum," Toval said, rushing to his equipment. "Her immune system is trying to process it, but it's—" The child's body stilled, her breathing shallow. The glow in her eyes dimmed further, and Lucas felt his heart drop. "Toval," he said again, his voice cracking. "It's not working," Toval admitted, slamming a fist onto the console. "Her physiology isn't adapting to the serum the way yours does. The spores are still overpowering her system." Lucas stood, his fists clenching. "Then we need to figure out why. What's the difference between her immune system and mine?" Toval frowned, staring at the screen displaying the child's vitals. "Zarethians have extremely specific immune responses. Their systems are designed for precision, targeting pathogens with laser-like focus. Yours, on the other hand, is chaotic." "Meaning?" "Meaning your immune system throws everything it has at a problem, even if half of it doesn't stick. It's like flooding a fire with water versus using a pinpoint extinguisher. Your chaos works because it overwhelms the pathogen faster than it can adapt." Lucas's mind raced, his thoughts colliding in a whirlwind of possibilities. "So we need to overwhelm the spores." Toval gave him a sharp look. "You can't just pump the serum into her endlessly. Her body wouldn't survive the strain." "Not her," Lucas said slowly, his voice dropping as an idea began to take shape. "The spores." Toval tilted his head, confusion flickering across his features. "Explain." "The spores aren't just a pathogen," Lucas said, pacing as he spoke. "They're a system, a network. They communicate, mutate, and spread like a living organism. If we can inject the serum into the spores themselves on a large enough scale, we might be able to destabilize the entire network." Toval's eyes widened as realization dawned. "But to affect a network that large, you'd need a vector, something that can distribute the serum across the spores faster than they can adapt." "Exactly," Lucas said, his voice gaining strength. "Zareth's ecosystem is full of plant life, roots, vines, structures that were overtaken by the spores. What if we use them to deliver the serum? Turn the spore's own system against them? Toval hesitated, then nodded slowly. It's risky, but it could work. We'd need to synthesize a larger batch of serum and modify it to bind to Zareth's native plant structures. If the plants can carry the serum into the spore's network, we can wipe them out from the inside, Lucas finished. Let's get to work. The two of them dove into the task with relentless focus. Toval worked on refining the serum, tweaking its properties to bond with the biostructures of Zareth's plant life. Lucas assisted, his mind sharp despite his exhaustion. The child remained in the corner, her shallow breaths a constant reminder of the stakes. As they worked, Lucas keyed his comms. "Lieutenant Darrow, come in." The static on the other end crackled before Darrow's voice came through, faint but clear. "Commander, you're still alive?" "Barely," Lucas replied. "I need you to prepare the shuttle for extraction. We're taking this fight to the spores." "Understood," Darrow said, his tone laced with hesitation. "But the Galactic Union isn't going to like this." "They've written Zareth off as a lost cause," Lucas said coldly. "It's time to prove them wrong." After hours of grueling work, Toval held up a vial of the modified serum. "This is it. If we can get this into the heart of the spore network, it should cascade through their system." Lucas took the vial, his resolve hardening. "I'll deliver it." "You're walking into the most heavily infested part of the planet," Toval said, his voice heavy with warning. "Even your immune system might not survive that." "Then I'll die trying," Lucas replied. He glanced at the child, her fragile form barely clinging to life. "We owe it to her, to all of them." Toval nodded, his expression grim. "Good luck, Commander." Lucas strapped on his gear, the serum secured in his pack. As he stepped toward the bunker's exit, the child's faint voice stopped him. "Don't go," she whispered, her glowing eyes meeting his. Lucas knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I have to, but I'll be back. I promise." With that, he turned and stepped into the toxic haze of Zareth's wasteland. The screeches of the spores grew louder as he moved deeper into the infected zone, the vial of humanity's hope burning like fire in his hand. This was the moment that would decide everything. The air grew heavier as Lucas pressed deeper into the heart of the Void Spore's infestation. The ruins around him seemed alive, twisted by the spore's relentless advance. Tendrils writhed across shattered buildings, pulsating with a malevolent glow. His breathing was labored, his biosuit straining against the toxic onslaught. Each step felt like a battle against the weight of the planet's despair. The serum vial, securely fastened in his pack, glowed faintly, a fragile beacon of hope. Lucas kept his focus sharp, his mind replaying Toval's final instructions. "Find the Nexus," Toval had said. "The spore network has a core, likely at the center of the oldest infestation. Inject the serum directly into the root system. If the plants distribute it, it might trigger a cascading failure across the entire network." But Toval hadn't mentioned what would happen to Lucas if he failed. Ahead, the air shimmered with heat, the haze parting to reveal a massive organic structure rising from the ground. It resembled a grotesque, pulsating tree, its branches writhing as though alive. Violet spores erupted intermittently from its surface, spreading a thick mist into the atmosphere. This was it, the Nexus. Lucas approached cautiously, his sidearm drawn. The tendrils surrounding the structure twitched, sensing his presence. One lashed out, and Lucas rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the barbed appendage. He fired, the energy bolt slicing through the tendril, but two more rose in its place. "Persistent little bastards," he muttered, his voice tight with tension. The ground trembled beneath him as more tendrils emerged, encircling him like serpents. Lucas's grip tightened on his weapon, but he knew he couldn't fight them all. He needed to reach the Nexus. Now. Summoning every ounce of his strength, Lucas charged forward, dodging and weaving as the tendrils lunged at him. One slashed across his shoulder, tearing through the fabric of his suit. Alarms blared in his helmet, warning of a breach, but Lucas gritted his teeth and pressed on. He reached the base of the Nexus, the heat radiating from it, searing even through his damaged suit. The root system glowed faintly beneath the surface, its network stretching out like veins through the soil. Lucas unstrapped the vial and loaded it into the injection device Toval had prepared. "Let's see if this works," he muttered, plunging the device into the Nexus's core. The serum flowed into the roots, its glow spreading through the network like wildfire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire structure shuddered violently, emitting a deafening screech that reverberated through the air. The spores reacted immediately. Tendrils convulsed, their movements erratic as the serum disrupted their coordination. The Nexus pulsed wildly, its glow flickering as if struggling to maintain control. "It's working," Lucas breathed, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. But the spores weren't giving up without a fight. The Nexus released a final surge of tendrils, lashing out in every direction. One struck Lucas square in the chest, sending him flying backward. He hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. His HUD flickered, warning of critical damage to his suit. The air burned in his lungs, and his vision blurred as the spores began to invade. Lucas's fingers brushed against the ground, searching for his weapon, but his strength was fading fast. "Not yet," he rasped, forcing himself to his feet. The Nexus loomed above him, its movements growing weaker as the serum continued to spread. Lucas took a shaky step forward, then another, his determination driving him beyond his limits. In the distance he heard the faint whine of engines. A voice crackled through his comms. "Commander Vayne, this is Lieutenant Darrow. We've got visual on your location. Hang tight." Lucas managed a faint smile. "About time," he muttered. The shuttle descended, its floodlights cutting through the haze. Darrow and a team of medics rushed out, their weapons trained on the writhing tendrils. They reached Lucas just as his legs gave out, catching him before he hit the ground. "We've got you, sir," Darrow said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Get the kid," Lucas murmured, his vision fading. "And Toval." Darrow nodded, signaling to his team. As they carried Lucas back to the shuttle, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The Nexus emitted a final, piercing shriek before collapsing in on itself, its structure dissolving into ash. The spores in the air began to dissipate, their glow dimming as the serum's effects rippled through the network. Back at the bunker, Toval watched the readings on his console with wide eyes. The spore levels were plummeting, the infection retreating at an unprecedented rate. The child stirred beside him, her breathing growing steadier as the spores in her system began to die off. "It's working," Toval whispered, his voice filled with awe. When Lucas woke, he was lying on a medical cot aboard the shuttle. The air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of Zareth. He blinked against the harsh light, his body aching with every movement. "You're awake," Toval said, stepping into view. He looked exhausted, but relieved. "The serum worked. The spores are collapsing across the planet." "And the kid?" Lucas croaked, his throat dry. "She's stable," Toval replied. "Your immune system, your biology, it saved her." Lucas closed his eyes, a wave of relief washing over him. "Good." Darrow appeared at the doorway, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "The Council's on the line, sir. They want an update." Lucas let out a tired laugh. "Let them wait." The shuttle touched down at the Galactic Union headquarters, where a crowd of diplomats, scientists, and reporters awaited. As Lucas stepped out, supported by Darrow, the gathered aliens fell silent. Their disbelief was palpable. Counselor Thalix approached, his expression guarded. "Commander Vayne, against orders, you risk contaminating the galaxy. Explain yourself." Lucas stood tall, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "I didn't risk contamination. I stopped it. Humanity's resilience, our biology, is what made it possible. You dismissed us as fragile and primitive, but our imperfection is our strength. We adapt. We endure." Thalix frowned, but murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Toval stepped forward, holding a vial of the refined serum. "The spores are retreating across Zareth," Toval announced. "Without Commander Vayne, the planet, and everyone on it, would have been lost." The murmurs grew louder, and Thalix finally inclined his head. Perhaps we underestimated humanity. Lucas glanced at the crowd, his gaze steady. Resilience doesn't come from perfection. It comes from facing the impossible and finding a way through. That's what humanity brings to the galaxy. As the crowd erupted in applause, Lucas allowed himself a rare smile. The lesson was clear. Strength isn't about being invincible. It's about enduring, adapting, and inspiring others to do the same. For the first time, humanity's place in the galaxy was secure.